Growing up, my grandfather was my biggest supporter. And he looks a little stern, but he was really, really loving. And he had a lot of grandchildren, so he didn't have any favorites. But I think he cared a lot about me because I reminded him of a lot of who he was as a little kid. So growing up, my grandfather taught himself to read. He grew up in poor, rural Mexico, and unfortunately that meant that his own father really didn't value education. And in the context that they were growing up, he wasn't necessarily wrong. To his father, every hour that he sent his son to work, he sent his son to school, meant 1 hour less of work and a little less food on a table that already had too little to begin with. But my grandfather was pretty smart, and whenever he had to do work around the house or in the nearby town, he used to sneak nearby where lessons were being taught to other kids, and he would just listen in while neglecting his duties and learn a little bit from the lessons that were being taught to other people. Now, the professor actually figured out what was happening and brought him in a little bit and figured out just how bright my grandfather was. So he gave him a few books for free on the side, and my grandfather would take these books and hide them near these big rocks near his house, stuff them under, and read them on his own time when no one was looking. Unfortunately, the professor tried to do a really lovely thing and go to my great-grandfather and beg him to let this bright child into his school. And my great-grandfather really didn't take that all that well. Unfortunately, my grandfather got beaten just for his love of learning. Thankfully, over the years, he managed to keep that up and eventually pieced together some Spanish, learned to read on his own and write on his own. And then when he worked as a bracero in the United States, he pieced together a little bit of English too, from a pretty lady in the United States. But don't tell my grandmother that. He instilled that same value of education in my father. This is me and my dad. This is in Guerrero, Mexico, where my dad grew up. So unfortunately, although my dad had all of the values of education, all of the encouragement, he still didn't have all of the resources. This is me and my family next to TEDxClaremont, so the middle school that my dad had to go to and had to build. So my dad does that thing that all dads do. He talks for hours and hours and hours about how he had to walk uphill both ways to get to school and to give me everything that I have, and you know, it's endearing because it's your dad, but you're like, oh. But to be fair to my dad, it actually wasn't far off. He tells me about his elementary school sometimes, and how it was just basically a chicken wire fence, and about the middle school that he had to build, and how there wasn't actually a high school by the time it came to it. So eventually, my dad, tired of the lack of educational resources and, frankly, monetary resources, made his way to the United States. And then there's little old me, with all the resources in the world and all of the support in the world. My parents did everything they possibly could to give me all of the love and everything I could use to succeed. Unfortunately, the one thing they couldn't fix with their own two hands were the educational barriers that I was going to face, all of the structural issues that they themselves couldn't fix. I have this one really vivid memory from when I was in second grade. I'm not really sure, but I remember that Jane ate 2 of Sam's 13 cookies and I was bawling because I had this really huge math worksheet, just really wordy problems and double-digit subtraction, which was honestly way too much for my little brain then. And sometimes when it's a really bad, it can also be a little hard, but I swear I've gotten past that a little bit. A little bit, a lot. But eventually, I learned to become really resourceful and really independent, and I really leaned into that in all ways of life. I learned to really succeed in school because I love my parents all the same, but their English was very limited, their education was very limited, so I couldn't really rely on them. And that was perfectly okay because they gave me all of the emotional support a very emotional little Emily really needed. Eventually, I made my way through public schools and I learned the best way to navigate them. I kept my head down. I was a great student. I took all of the hardest problems and I sat there on my little desk and did my best and eventually figured out my way through them. But what happened when I got to a better resourced school was I learned the things that were actually very particular to public schools. Often, there were too little resources and teachers were stretched far too thin. That help, I learned, was reserved for people who were unintelligent or troublemakers. That was not for me. So what I had to unlearn by the time I got out of the public school system was a long list of cultural issues. I had to learn for the first time that asking for help or asking questions in class wasn't a distraction. Teachers counted it as engagement, and they expected it of you. And if you didn't do that, your participation grade was not going to be too high. This is just one of the many things that people like to include in what is called a hidden curriculum. They like to use it at colleges, a lot like this one, and at PWIs. And for those of you in the room who don't know what a PWI is, that is a predominantly white institution that is often used to describe colleges. My first day at a PWI was kind of lovely. I got to my classroom and it was a really lovely teacher and he was letting us chat all we could. He went around the room and asked us our name, where we were from, our fun fact, the dreaded fun fact. And what a lot of students used that first day was their summer. Makes sense. It's what you just came from. But what ended up happening was we had a very long conversation about our vacations and about started bonding about how we had our vacation homes close to each other in Martha's Vineyard. And by the end of the class, we talked too much, and the professor said to just read the syllabus for homework, it wasn't going to be much, and to come to office hours if we had any questions. I walked out. I had no clue what Martha's Vineyard was or what the last 40 minutes had been about. I had no clue what a syllabus was, and I had no clue what office hours were. So I was a little confused, but little old Emily got some help by the end of the day. I wandered into a little affinity group. This is them right here. This is Alianza, which was a Latin X affinity group at an institution, not here, but similar to this. And that is where I found a lot of the resources that I wasn't being given in the explicit curriculum. Some upperclassmen, very lovely upperclassmen, filled me in on the gaps that I was missing. They taught me that I did not have to have questions to go to office hours. A lot of the times, professors actually wanted to talk to you and would count that in your grade if you came and engaged and asked them about the class and about their life and things of the sort, and you might even get babysitting gigs if you needed money. Which, all of this, a lot of students can go their entire way through the institution without knowing if you are not connected to the right community resources. Thankfully, I was, and this was my senior year, so these were a lot of the freshmen that I helped bring up. But honestly, I think that this community helped me not only stay in the institution, but really thrive in it. Because sometimes I honestly really applaud the way that colleges across the country have really put in the effort to up the number of low-income students at their institutions, to up the number of students of color and first-generation college students, and to really make that place, make that institution a welcoming situation for everybody. However, colleges and places like them can kind of be like a lazy boyfriend sometimes. You know, before you're dating, they'll spend all of their time, all of their money courting you, and they're just maybe they'll try and impress your parents if they get the chance. But by the time you're dating, they start spending money on tickets to be with their friends or prioritizing their career over you. And all of a sudden, you're feeling left unheard, unseen, unloved. and unsupported. And my partners in the crowd right now, this is not an act. We're all good. But I think what institutions and lazy boyfriends forget is that relationships are an ongoing effort, an ongoing commitment. And getting you is sometimes even less important than keeping you. And they need to work on that. So thankfully, I had a lot of these people to support me in keeping me at the institution. But, you know, I think the best comparison would be if your boyfriend is being really bad to you, you know who's supporting you through that? That best friend that you've been with since you all were in diapers. And you're calling them up at 1 a.m. because he's been bad to you, and they're holding your hand when he makes you cry. But I can bet that she, they are a little tired by that. If you've been in this relationship for 1, 2, 3, ideally 4 years since you graduate, they're definitely a little tired of this. And I think we are all starting to feel that as well. Because these students are honestly the ones that sometimes are already disadvantaged, are already trying to navigate the hidden curriculum, are already, like statistically the most harassed, the ones with the lowest sense of belonging, and are doing their own thing. And on top of this, have to help everybody else. It can kind of feel like you're drowning, and at the same time have to support other people, so you're just drowning a little less sometimes, and sometimes a little more, and it goes up and down, but nobody's just having a great time. And a lot of these times, students learn things through trial and fire. They will go through their first year, learn a little bit, and do their best to pass it on immediately to the next generation. So we see a little bit of the blind leading the blind, which is not quite as helpful. Eventually, of course, institutions know that if you love these people, which you end up doing, of course, or at least I hope so for all of you in the crowd, that you find a community that supports you and that you want to support as well. However, I think that institutions really shouldn't shy away from showing that extra support to the people that need it. And that includes these. I have stayed up throughout my years, more hours in my life, supporting younger students who need the help navigating this hidden curriculum than I have on my schoolwork ever, cumulatively. And I think most other disadvantaged students feel the same way. Again, not to speak for everybody, but a lot of my peers who truly care about their communities, care about people, end up doing this work because they know that when you're a disadvantaged student, your support system is your lifeline. We see here some of my favorite people who I have had to support throughout my time. I was staying up till 3 a.m., helping them write emails to professors and helping them learn what the extensions were. I was a parent, I was a tutor, I was a school research liaison, everything under the sun. And if we can't pay students for this unpaid labor, then I think we should at least try and support them more fully. Because I was having a conversation with my friend, maybe not even a week ago, honestly, and she had this sudden realization. She was talking about everything that she was going through, and she kind of stops as we were walking. And she goes, you know, if I was just a student, I'd be such a good student. I wouldn't have to worry about my next paycheck. I wouldn't have to worry about anything else. I would just do my homework and hang out with my friends, which is crazy. And I think it really goes to show the different lives that most regular students and then disadvantaged students have. They have a commitment, ideally, a commitment to their community and a commitment to helping others go through what they have already gone through. But I think what my grandfather's story, my father's story, and my own story really show is that just really hoping, wanting somebody to come into an educational institution and really hoping that they learn and do well isn't going to be enough, as much as we want it to. We really have to break down the monetary barriers and the structural institutional barriers as well. Thank you.